month celebration of our museum called Call to Conscience. Well, I can tell you that after year one, I didn't think that we'd be doing this again, but here we are in the third year, and the mission remains the same. We have installations, exhibits, artifacts, interactive activities, virtual experiences celebrating the achievements and the achievers of Seattle's Black African American community. Now, in Seattle, learning about the legacies and achievements of Black Seattleites provides context for how we got to where we are today and a deeper understanding of the issues we still face. This Call to Conscience Black History Month Museum honors Black achievement, explores Seattle's Black communities, resistance to repression and racism while celebrating the advances of Black culture contributes to our current society in Seattle today. The entire month of February, Columbia City Theater becomes the Call to Conscience Black History Month Museum, located right here at 4916 Rainier Avenue South. There's also a gift shop where you can pick up items from each exhibitor that we have here to take home with you as well. Another great lineup this year. We've got an incredible showing of the history of faith and religion of African Americans. Yeah, it started at some point in Seattle. We've retraced that history, and we have a display and an exhibit and an installation showcasing that to you as well. We have the Seattle Black Panther Party, which, if you don't know, the Seattle Black Panther Party was the first chapter formed outside of California and did amazing historical things. Heard the free breakfast program, that thing that is national now? Well, that started with the Seattle Black Panther Party. This building that we're in was once known as the Rainier Cinema. Rainier Cinema was the only place in the late 60s and early 70s where we could come watch what we called Black and Kung Fu movies. That is the building that we're in. There is the Rainier Cinema Vintage Movie Poster Collection, where you'll be able to see movie posters from the 50s, 60s, 70s. These aren't reprints. These are actual posters. Then you'll move into our main theater where you'll get to see the Hartsfield Quilt Collection. If you're unfamiliar with the quilt codes, these are codes that were written into quilts that were hung over clotheslines for those who were trying to escape being enslaved, to get messages. Academia says they did not exist. We know they did exist. These quilts are actual proof. The Hartsfield Quilt Collection contains quilts from as far back as the 1850s. So excited to have the Metro League involved. Metro League, part of Seattle Public Schools athletic arm. We're showcasing African Americans who contributed to the history of the Metro League. Now, the ironic thing about this is that you can't find this history anywhere. Recently, there were some things done, including the starting of a Hall of Fame that document some of these achievements. But we went back to uncover and discover some of these achievements from a while ago. So we've got the Metro League, History of the Metro League exhibit that starts here as well. In addition to that, this is the first year that we've been engaged outside of Seattle. So we also have what we're calling T. Hurd's Tacoma, which is Tony Hurd, and he's gathered folks from Tacoma and put together an exhibit which will give you the history of Tacoma, Black Tacoma. We have our Quincy Jones Memorial exhibit. Now, at one point in my life, I was a musician, and Quincy Jones was a huge inspiration for me. So we are so happy to have this exhibit here. Our hyper focus is on his time spent in Bremerton and his time spent in Seattle. And so we are just honored to have Quincy as part of our collection of what we're doing here. And finally, you'll see an exhibit called Africa to America, which explains African chiefs, queens, tribal leaders from the 1800s all the way up to today, which fought for their independence and then also worked to fight for the independence along with activists from this country. This is information that we're happy to show because this information was repressed. We don't often get told about those who are actually from Africa, who fought alongside people like Dr. Martin Luther King for our freedoms. So we're really excited to get started here today. We have a bunch of great folks who are part of this exhibit who are going to share information with you. But we're going to start by blessing the building, and I'll introduce Mr. Pastor Tyrone Kinney. How y'all doing today? All right. Are y'all ready for this good history? We're going to pray it in and bless the building and bow your head. And oh, Heavenly Father, as we come today, Father, give us knowledge of the past, Father, and give us knowledge of the future, Father. And Father, let this Rainier Avenue Radio App, Father, right here in the Columbia Theater, Father. Bless each and every person that brought a exhibit, Father. Bless each and every person that participated, Father. Don't matter what the situation is, Father. Father, that you dwell your Holy Spirit into us today, Father, and let us feel the anointments that what they've been through in the times that they came through. And we ask you these things in your beautiful Son, Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.
Amen. And we'll get started with the singing of the Black National Anthem. And here to do that is the incredible Z. Jones.
Lift every voice and sing till earth and heaven ring, ring with the harmonies of liberty. Let our rejoicing rise high as the listening sky. Let it resound loud as the rolling sea. Sing a song full of the faith that the dark past has taught us. Sing a song full of the hope that the presence has brought us. Facing the rising sun of a new day's begun. Let us march on till victory is won. Woo! Yeah.
Thank you, Z, and we're going to start this off. I'm so happy to have this individual here, a family member of Quincy Jones, who share a little bit about her experiences, her thoughts, and of course, whatever she wants to about her uncle, who we're so happy to be able to memorialize here today. You got to get down here at some point during this month and see all these amazing exhibits. This one really hits home for me as a former musician. So please, and also the author of a new book. And you can go ahead and don't worry about giving yourself some promo too. It is wonderful to have you here. Everyone put your hands together and please welcome Ms. Dana Frank.
Appreciate you. Well, if Tony said anything, the most important thing is for y'all to get down here because this is so incredibly impressive. I just feel like I have just really come home. I mean, standing there looking at the piano that my uncle first touched when he came here to the Pacific Northwest was such an emotional experience for me this morning, as well as my sister. So thank you, Tony. Thank you for doing this. Thank you for having me. As Tony shared, well, first of all, Tony and I go way back. I think the last time Tony and I saw each other might have been about, I'm not even going to say what year it was, but we were swimming at Seattle University. So we were little kids, and so this is home. But my family in 1943, my grandparents made a choice, and the choice was to transform lives, change the narrative, and create legacy. And they brought their family from Chicago, the only home that they had known, and they traveled to Bremerton, Washington. My mother tells the story, and I recently just made this journey with my mom as they opened up Quincy Square there in Bremerton. And when we went back to the projects, there were at one point 7 kids and 2 adults living in a 1-bedroom project there in Bremerton. My grandfather came seeking work in the shipyards as a carpenter, and my grandmother was a lifelong maid. But the choice that they made, seeking a better life for their family, my family didn't just break barriers, they shattered them. They produced my mother, who's my business partner, we're long-term 3rd-generation family-owned and operated apartment rental business. They had my uncle, a federal judge, Richard Jones. They had my aunt, the first African-American flight attendant that Alaska Airlines would hire and retire. And of course, no other greater individual than my uncle, producer, Quincy Jones. And Uncle Quincy's music touches every generation and every core of all of our lives. And we were so fortunate to have a front row seat to witness and the lyrics behind his songs, forcing us to take a look at the man in the mirror. And Uncle Quincy passed away, as you know, this past November. But the lessons and the gifts that he left us live on. Every time we spoke, every time we hung up the phone, he would say, "YOLO Coco, baby, YOLO Coco." And that is, you only live once, so keep on keeping on. And he also said, live, laugh, love, and give every day. So that's what we're here to do. We're here to look at how we can change the narrative. And I'd like to end with, as Tony allowed me to give a plug for my book, Get Up and Get On It. And that's really what we're forced to do every day, is to get up and get on it. And in my book, I write a poem, and I'd like to share it with you, called Firestarters. And it was really dedicated to my uncle, to my father, to all of us as we stand here today on the first day of Black History Month, so that we remember what it means. And with all due compassion to the awful fires that are happening in California, I call this one Fire Starters. So think about the person in your family that was a fire starter, the first one to pick up the baton and start the relay and say, we're going to make a change. A fire starter is born with passion, drive, and vision. They don't accept the narrative at birth which they were given. The life of living paycheck to paycheck and barely getting by, waiting to collect Social Security when their time comes to die. Fire starters aren't born with a silver spoon or a trust fund, but they refuse to be invisible and have their dreams shunned. They amplify injustice, speak out, and protest the unfair, so that the marginalized and those left out of the script will also get their share. Fire starters know better than to settle for less and follow the masses. I witness his tenacity, grit, and grind from behind my uncle's glasses. Fire starters know that success only comes before work in the dictionary, and if you don't try, you have no one else to blame. At the end of your journey, what will be your legacy? And how bright will be your flame? Thank you. Thank you.
Awesome, awesome, awesome. We're going to continue with the Quincy Jones theme. Our next guest here was incredibly instrumental. You could say kind of started this thing with Quincy Jones Square in Bremerton. I'd like to welcome Mr. Steve Rice to the podium, and he's going to share a little bit with you about his thoughts about Quincy and then more about Quincy Jones Square.
Thank you, Thomas. Well, good morning. My pleasure to be here. How do I follow that? I wonder. Thanks for coming to Bremerton. I have 2.5 stories, I guess. I'll keep them short. One is how did Quincy Square come to be in Bremerton? And the second maybe is a short story on how we found the piano. 10 years ago, a little over 10 years ago, in my architecture practice, we decided to work on reviving a downtown street in Bremerton, which had been sort of left for dead in the 80s when the mall was built outside our downtown. And we thought about reimagining the street in the very center of our city, centered on the Roxy Theater, and making a place for people to gather, people to come, centered on music, the experience of music and the arts. And we thought to ourselves, we have an opportunity to do this, but also do it in the name of someone who spent part of their childhood living in Bremerton and grew to global fame, who changed the face of popular music around the globe, and who spent formative years in Bremerton, and where Quincy discovered music, where he touched that piano. That happened in Bremerton. So 10 years later, we are under construction. It's been a long haul. And we had the groundbreaking 2 Mondays ago, I guess. And we are excited this summer to cut a ribbon on what we call Quincy Square. And it's going to do a lot for our city, namely as a place where the whole community has contributed into helping design and build it. That was the nature of the thing. And a place where we can always remember kind of Quincy's example of bringing people together. And that's when I think of Quincy now, I don't just think of, musician, producer. I think of a man who could bring people together to do great things. So we're very proud of that. The piano that's inside, we began to wonder, Quincy's years in Bremerton were 1943 to 1946, and that's a long time ago. He and his family lived in what was called Sinclair Park. It was the segregated part of Bremerton Housing Authority's mission to house an extra 60,000 people who came to Bremerton to work in the shipyard during the war effort. Quincy's family, one of those families. And in the middle of Sinclair Park was a community center. Each of the park districts around Bremerton had a community center, and there was a piano in this one. Quincy and his little buddies broke in one night to get pie, and Quincy wandered off down the hall, and he went into an office or another room, and he sees this thing in the corner. He said he had never seen a musical instrument before. He knew what guns were, but he had never seen a musical instrument. So he didn't know what to do with it, but it looked like something that you should touch. And so he did touch it, and the famous line on the Stephen Colbert show, how did you get your start in the music business? I touched it, and every cell in my body said, this is what you're going to do with the rest of your life. So we've been saying that to ourselves and wondering, is there another Quincy Jones in Bremerton? But we'll see. That neighborhood was torn down in the 50s. It didn't live very long. And the community center lasted longer. It was turned into an armory. Eventually, it was torn down. A man in our community decided to see if he could find the piano. And after a lot of searching, it stayed in the armory system. It went to Fort Lewis. It ended up in Shelton, of all places, and was documented that it had been in Bremerton. Quincy was able to see a photograph of it, and he shook his head and said, yeah, that's the one. And so we have it on good authority that this is the piano. And it was a pleasure to bring it over last week, and Tony and y'all can take care of it while it's here, and people can enjoy touching it, as you did, Dana. Come to Bremerton. We have, there's an outgrowth of the Quincy Square effort, the 10-year effort. I helped start a nonprofit. Will Clemmer, my friend here, was also part of it, and Tony was part of it, starting something called the Music Discovery Center, obviously named after that moment, where we can offer the same opportunity for kids to have more exposure to the world of music and make it part of their lives. And so we're working very hard to do that. And this year we are very happy to to start something called the Quincy Square Jazz Festival, and it will happen this coming Friday in Bremerton at the Roxy Theater. And it's a mix of middle school and high school stage bands, some from Seattle, but mostly from our side. We will grow this over the years to become the biggest one in the Northwest. And youth and a professional band, a professional stage band will all be on stage at the Roxy. And this is a celebration for us, and it's something that we will continue to do every year. So Quincy lives on in Bremerton. Thanks.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Tony.
Thanks, Steve. All right. How about that? If you are unfamiliar with the history of Quincy, and I know that you are watching right now and listening in Seattle and surrounding cities and around the country and around the world, that is why we are sharing the story of predominantly Seattle African Americans here at the Call to Conscience Museum, sharing the stories from the voices who created the history. A lot of our history has been lost. A lot of our history, at least in Seattle, is very young, and it's been in attics and treasure chests. And sometimes those things happen where there's some sort of storm and they get lost, or even in instances where you have younger generations who say, well, what do we do with all this old stuff? And it gets thrown away. And I'll tell you a quick story about that as well before we move on to our next speaker. For those of you who remember Pat Wright and Total Experience Gospel Choir, we had that exhibit here last year. Pat had passed away, and I said, well, we need to memorialize her. We need to make sure that this history is not lost. And I contacted someone, and they said, oh, this is great. We'd love to participate. Just one problem. So what's that? Well, apparently after the passing, for whatever reasons, the house that Pat had, which had all of the memorabilia stored in it in one room, was sold. And when the house was sold, they took all of that memorabilia and threw it away. So it's just important that we keep our history, we archive our history, and that is our responsibility. You cannot blame someone if you don't keep track of your own history. It's our job. And that's what we're doing here today. And that's what these folks who are contributing through installations and exhibits are doing here today as well. I'd also like to bring someone up right now. One of the things that I thought was really important that we make sure and share with everyone was the history of faith and religion of African Americans from Seattle. For a number of different reasons. See, Seattle, again, is very young, and these churches became homes of political conversation, of social conversation, you name it. It was center of power for the Black community. It evolved and changed and manifested itself in different ways, but it's important to know how it got started, who started it, and whether you disagree or agree on religion or faith or what that means or what that looks like. We're just sharing the history. So I'd like to bring up one of the researchers from the Washington State Black Legacy Institute, Ms. Meg Sloan.
So I have Roger Evans at the Washington State Black Legacy Institute to thank because he wanted to support his community and offered an internship to my son. And because of that internship, I learned about Roger Evans's work, and I was compelled to volunteer because it is important, this history. It's not just Black history, it's American history. And so he asked me to research Black churches. And y'all, I mean, the work that has been done by Black churches, not just the faith work, but the community work of providing educational opportunity, creating leaders in the community, creating credit unions so members can get loans when that wasn't possible. I mean, if our country is built on heroes, these are the heroes that we need to know about. because not only these heroes stood up for themselves and brought and created opportunity for their families, but then they turned to the community and brought other people up. And it is something that every child should know from that lives in Seattle, every child that should know that lives in Washington State, and every child should know that lives in our country, because our identity as Americans are from these heroes. We know Quincy Jones changed the music industry. He had such an influence, and he was from here, and people should know. And this is so exciting, the exhibit that's here. And everybody should really come down and see and touch and know this history and know the inspiration that is here in our everyday people who persevere despite limitations that is placed upon them, and know that inspiration, because in these times we need heroes, and these heroes are here, and the history is here waiting for us to discover. Thank you.
Thank you, Meg. And our next guest speaker is a wonderful friend of mine who we've had many adventures together, and I'm so excited that he is part of this journey with us. And when I, of course, asked him to present and produce this package, without question, he said yes. And this is the Africa to America section of the museum. Now, many of us have heard about Middle Passage and that, but it didn't stop there. As a matter of fact, and I'm sure he will share the stories with you about the tribal leaders and chiefs and queens of Africa who continued to work with the members of our activist communities here up to today. We have an African immigrant population that arrived as well. And he'll talk with you about some of the challenges that were faced, even among members of the African immigrant community, and identifying with the Black community here. So whether you agree or disagree, once again, it's important to know the history. And my next guest speaking with us, Mr. Davis Shirwa.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning. I want to say, coming from Africa, we're also very inspired by the story of Quincy Jones. We used to watch, We Are the World, and we'll look up the history and we'll study the whole thing. And it was exciting. So, and I remember for me, when I used to watch TV, look at all these beautiful images, I'm like, if this is America that I see on TV, that's where I need to be. And here I am. Well, my name is Davis Shirwa. I was raised in Zambia, which is the central part of Africa. I've been living in Seattle for 25 years now, and I've met amazing folks such as Tony. He's been a friend of mine for many years, but I do have a story as well, just like most of you in the audience. Growing up in Africa, we had a continuation of life where stories were being told from one generation to next. So when folks migrate from different parts of the world, they come here into the United States or England, you lose that touch of that continuation, because our forefathers used to sit us down and tell us stories of how, our clans, are integrated into the community and how we got to where we were. And so when I migrated to Seattle, first of all, the weather was a challenge. The food was a challenge. And you can look outside, you can see what I'm talking about, but here we are. But this is a wonderful opportunity for me to be here, because I'm one of the examples of the people that you've seen that have gone through the struggles of integrating into the community. And but I stand here with a great story and amazing opportunity. One of the folks that you see that film Super Bowl, right? Anybody like football? Okay, so I'll be privileged. Again, Tony, I forgot to tell you, on Monday, I'll be going to cover Super Bowl for the next 7 days. So right here from Seattle. Yeah. So you'll be able to see some of our images, a little bit, maybe in a couple hours, from some of the stuff that we've covered for the last maybe 15 years, covering the NFL, the Sounders, the Huskies, and all that. But before all those stories, I wanted to share something which is important also for the viewers, to know that when you look at African Americans in this community, in this city, in this United States, The story didn't just start from here. It started all the way from Africa. And when I look at women in this audience, it reminds me of how powerful women are, because when you look at history, you don't see a lot of women being mentioned that even in Africa, they actually helped to conquer, the people that came to take over the land, and women are there. And so when Tony asked me to share something, I thought it was important to highlight women, powerful women, just as powerful as men, if not more, who are part of creating that change to where we are here today. So you look up history, you find that all the way from South Africa to North Africa, whether it's in Algeria, Morocco, there are women all the way. They're not documented as it should have been. But we are here to tell the story. And you also realize that folks that live outside the United States may actually know more history of the United States than the people that are actually growing up here. I can tell you the history of not just the civil rights leaders, but the beginning of the United States, which I think is cool that the government make us to learn the history, right? Even before you get here. So it's easier for us as immigrants to know more information, but we have a responsibility also to tell our African-American brothers to make sure they know that where they come from, there's just a continuation of history that leads us to where we are today. So it's a great opportunity for me to be here to present parts of the pieces that tells the history of Africa. Most of you might not know that the civil leaders here, they worked with leaders in Africa. So they had that opportunity to get the mentorship that we needed. And here we are. Now change continues on. So I'm excited to be here. Antonio, thank you so much for the privilege for me to share my story. But it hasn't been easy. All I can say to encourage the young folks, especially that are watching right now, when you see me on TV, you see me doing all these things, you just have to continue working really hard, understanding where you come from. You won't know where you're going unless you understand where you're coming from. So it's important that all communities living here in the United States understand the history of Africa and how we got to get here. In closing, I want to say, when folks migrate here, we still have challenges that we came from Africa, because we came from different tribes and different, landmarks, right? So when you see folks coming from Africa, migrating from different parts of the world, we still have challenges that moments like these are needed for us to sit down and share history, and you'll find out that people are the same. Regardless of where you come from, regardless of where you're going, we are the same. And like Tony said, Black History Month is not just Black History Month here in the United States, it's Black History Month throughout the world, because everybody's learning. You're watching me right now, but people that are watching, being inspired by my story and Tony's story and your stories are a lot. So be careful what you say, make sure that you do your research, and life continues. So thank you so much. It's a privilege to be here. Thank you.
Happy Black History Month. Yes, happy Black History Month. And again, just let what we're doing here today be the spark that encourages you to find out more yourself. You may have to do some due diligence. You may have to do a little research. You may have to dig. There are some things that are obviously readily available that you can see as well. I'm sure that there are events taking place. You know what? You have the entire month. So you don't have an excuse for at least one time during this month to learn more about, again, what's not just Black history, it's American history. I'd like to welcome everyone again to this Rainier Avenue Radio broadcast of the opening ceremonies of the Call to Conscience Black History Month Museum. Once again, this is the third year that we are turning the Columbia City Theater, which itself is a historic building, into the Call to Conscience Museum. For those of you who are Rainier Avenue Radio regular listeners, thank you for joining us. You'll hear some information that may be redundant to you. For those of you who are tuning in, again, literally from Seattle, around the state, around the country, and around the world for this huge occasion, I'm going to share some information with you about who we are. Columbia City Theater is 109 years old. It's the oldest vaudeville theater in Seattle's history. The oldest. It's been a number of things. It's been a burlesque theater. It's been an adult theater. It has been a comedy theater. Of course, it's been a jazz club. At one point, it was known as probably the biggest club or most popular club in the, I think it was called the Underground Wave scene. It's been a comedy club. And yes, today, it is also home of the Black History Month Museum. Some of the folks who performed, it's like a who's who of superstars that have performed on this stage. The very stage that now plays home to the piano that Quincy touched. Yes, Quincy performed on this stage. Jimi Hendrix performed on this stage. Ella Fitzgerald performed on this stage. Fats Waller performed on this stage. Seattle has an incredible jazz history in the 20s, 30s, 40s, and 50s called Jackson Street. Jackson Street in a 12-block area was home to, I think, 30 different nightclubs. We had that exhibit here for the last couple of years, and we're happy to share that with you. And you might say to yourself, well, why was Seattle such a home for jazz? Well, there were a number of reasons. You could come to Seattle if you were a Black musician, and you could actually get a hotel room. The way that it worked was that the Native community that was here, the Asian community that was here, the Black community that was here, the white community that was here, all partied together on Jackson Street at night. And so Jackson Street became a hotbed for this new, remember, we're talking about a new style of music at the time, this thing called jazz that wasn't even really accepted. And some folks said that, no, you can't do this to music. Well, we know what jazz became, but a lot of it got started right here in Seattle. And I think that was it was meant to be that Quincy came here in those early years and was able to cut his teeth with some of the best jazz musicians, not only in the country, but in the world. So that's a little bit here. Oh, also Nirvana's performed here, of course, before they were famous. Macklemore performed here before he was famous. Smashing Pumpkins, Mix-a-Lot. This building has been the kickoff point for so many different musicians that have performed here. That's a little history on the Columbia City Theater. So Rainier Avenue Radio. Rainier Avenue Radio is a community radio station. We broadcast in the interest of the community. That's what we do. We have over 80 programs, over 80 programs that are hosted by members of our community. So you want a show on Rainier Avenue Radio? This is how it works. You call us, and we put you on the air. It's that simple. Now, if you decide that you would like training, we provide you with training. I'd like to talk with you a little bit about our training programs. We offer training in everything from communications and journalism to app design, web design, film, photography, broadcast. At Rainier Avenue Radio, we have graduated over 500 students from our program. That deserves it. We have youth who are currently broadcasting at Notre Dame, at the University of Southern California, at Butler, at the University of Washington, at Western Washington University, at Central Washington University, at Seattle Central College. We have youth who are broadcasting Western Washington all over the place. We have folks who graduated from our program who are doing things literally, and I mean this, all over the world. So our education program, which is not something that we talk about a lot, is a big part of what we do. And those young people come back and continue to work with us and help those also who are getting a start. And so now I'm going to give somebody a shout out who's probably like, don't put my name, but Lavere, where you at, Lavere? Lavere is interning for us now. And she's she's having that experience of the interns have of, I have to do everything. So that's our educational program. We broadcast a number of different things. We broadcast talk shows, critical issues talk shows. Some of the shows that we broadcast that involve talk, folks are funny. Well, at least folks hope they're funny. We also broadcast high school sports. We broadcast Metro League sports. We broadcast football, basketball, baseball. We broadcast volleyball and soccer. And believe me, there's nothing like broadcasting these high school sports games and giving these young people the opportunity to have their family members who don't live in the city or can't attend the games watch them for free. That's what we do. That's how we get down, and that's a little bit more about Rainier Avenue Radio. We also broadcast music of all genres, you name it. You can hear it on Rainier Avenue Radio, from classical music to, of course, hip-hop and jazz and ethnic music. We broadcast in multiple languages. We broadcast in Fijian. We broadcast in Vietnamese. We broadcast in Spanish. We broadcast in Mandarin Chinese. We broadcast in so many languages because that's who lives in our community right here in South Seattle. If you are unfamiliar with South Seattle's Columbia City, Hillman City area, we are the most diverse community in the country. The most diverse community in the country. So is Mr. Tharp over there? I can't see with the lights on. I'm going to bring in my next guest here, who is the holder of the Hartsfield Quilt Collection. And I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the quilt codes. He's going to talk to you about his family's quilt collection. Again, the quilt codes were codes that were written into quilts. Quilts would be hung over clotheslines, and if you were enslaved and you were running away, these quilts would say, go to the river, or this is a safe house, or this is not a safe house. And it was an amazing way to communicate. Again, academia does not recognize the quilt codes for the brilliance that it was, because they say that there's nothing written down. These are just stories that are told. Well, of course it wasn't written down. Of course it wasn't written down. Aside from the fact that you could get killed for reading and writing, why would you write something down to give your oppressor an inside track onto you escaping to your freedom? Well, we know that these codes exist because they exist in the quilts that families continued to quilt and share these stories. Mr. Tharp's family, the Hartsfield Quilt Collection, began quilting in slavery while they were enslaved. Now, remember, there were no Michaels, there were no Joannes, there was nowhere to go get material. You barely had clothes to wear. So finding material to even create these quilts was difficult. And then once the quilts were created, they weren't just decorative pieces. They were worn, they were used to carry things, they were used for everything. So not many of them survived. What did survive were the stories. And then those were the stories that were used as families continued to quilt and share those stories and continued. Mr. Tharp has quilts that date from the 1850s that you will see here in this collection of the Hartsfield Quilt Collection. And his family was important and critical in creating the messaging that went into the Underground Railroad. Please welcome my guest, Mr. Jim Tharp.
Thank you, sir. What an introduction. It's too bad it's not for me. It's for my great-great-great-grandmother. I should say my great-great-grandmother, who was born in 1845 in Tennessee. I'm extremely fortunate to have a set of quilts that have been made in my family since 1855 to roughly 1966, quite honestly. What you will see here is going to be somewhat different than what you would see in most places where you'll see African American art, which is all the designs that go into it, which is quite beautiful. But when you are talking about the Underground Railroad, that's a little bit different because those quilts were made up of that day's, shall we say, modern look. So it would never look like it was from Africa. It would always look like it was from the European countries. So, and that difference, when you see my quilts, please understand that that is the major difference. This was made during slavery. What my grandmother also did, which was highly unusual, when slavery was over, she made a quilt. And what we called it in my family, we called it the Hope Quilt. And for many reasons, but we called it the Hope Quilt. Well, roughly a year ago, I was in Tennessee at the university, the museum, pardon me. And they looked at it and said, no, it's a Hope Quilt, true enough, but it's a Lincoln's Hope Quilt pattern for America, which was interpreted by a slave. So what you will see is the first Juneteenth quilt made, and the interpretation of a Black woman who was a slave, who looked at a picture, went home, and then made it. Now, when you look at this particular quilt, you'll see a lot of different pieces into it. And what she did was, when slavery was over, and this was 1867, when Juneteenth was obviously being made, what she did is go to her area, her farm where she and her family worked, and took pieces of all their materials, of all their clothing, that type of thing, and make this Hope Quilt. So it became the family Hope Quilt, but in reality, it was Americans' Hope Quilt. And for that, it's a unique piece that will never be seen again. And I just have to thank this organization, Tony, for allowing me to bring these things to you that, if not, you would never see them. So.
Thank you.
So I told you were going to see things here that you will not have the opportunity to see anywhere else. And we're so happy to be doing this again, and so happy to have these folks contributing to provide this to you. I mean, man, just think about it. We have got that original piano that Quincy Jones first touched, that led to him working with everybody from Ray Charles to Frank Sinatra to Michael Jackson, producing the greatest, largest selling album of all time, the largest single of all time. We've got that piano right here. We have artifacts from the Hartsfield quilt collection, that these quilts are known all over the world, have been written in so many different places. We have those right here. We've got new history, because history in Seattle is not very old. 100 years isn't a long time. So when we're talking about the Metro League, you're going to see information here from women who were the first in their sport. Remember, Title IX wasn't that long ago, when women weren't allowed to play sports. And so this history is really young. And that's the purpose of doing what we're doing, to make sure that we get these stories out from the voices that made the history. Again, thank you so much for tuning in and listening. If you were just listening, if you were watching, thank you for tuning in across our media broadcast networks. Thank you to everyone who participated, to everyone who's in it. We're going to open up the museum. We'll be open from 11 a.m. to 7 p.m., 6 days a week, Tuesday through Sunday. Monday will be the only off day. You can go to the calltoconscience.world website. That's calltoconscience.world website. And there you can pick up advance tickets, which I'd highly recommend. Folks have been purchasing them. We've got schools who've been purchasing tickets. We've got groups who've been purchasing tickets. But I say that not to scare you. I say that because you need to get down here after the 28th of February. This all goes away. Everything goes back to where it was, and you may have access to it. You probably won't. But this is an incredible opportunity. And so I'm saying to those of you who have children, bring your children down here so that they can see firsthand the experiences of Seattle African American history that you won't be able to find anywhere in one place. And I'm telling you, I've been to King County Archives. And to go through King County archives just to find some basic information, you have to research for months and put the pieces of the puzzle together. We've got all this stuff right here for you to be able to learn the history of Seattle African Americans. And again, my feeling is we're not Chicago. We're not New York. We're not Dallas. We are Seattle. And there is a reason why we're where we are today. And to find out more about that context, you have to know who we were. So once again, I'll quickly go over the exhibits that you're going to see here today. There's the history of Seattle Black churches, social and political contributions, the history of the Seattle Public Schools Metro League, Africa to America. Also the Seattle Black elected officials exhibit, the Rainier Cinema Vintage Black Movie Poster Collection, which actually is mine. It was this nerdy thing that I used to do when I was a kid, when I used to come to this theater. But it was the only theater that I would ever come to that I would see people who look like me on the posters. Now, these movies like Superfly and Foxy Brown and Cleopatra Jones that we all came to also became known as blaxploitation films. It's a whole nother story, but that story is being told here as well. So a lot of great things. The Seattle Black Firefighters exhibit is here today. And man, just the history of the Seattle Black Firefighters. Seattle started its fire department in 1888. The first Seattle Black firefighter wasn't hired until 1968. I like to say white folks would rather have their homes burned down for 80 years than have a black firefighter come in and save the home. That first black firefighter that was hired, Claude Harris, eventually became chief of the entire Seattle Fire Department. Yeah, that deserves right. So when I tell you it's important to learn and understand how we overcame the repression, oppression, and racism that we faced in Seattle to understand who we are and where we are today, that is a wonderful example. And last but not least, the incredible Seattle Black Panther Party exhibit, which is just phenomenal. And if you are under the impression, like we had folks who came down from, I think it was definitely in British Columbia, a small town in British Columbia, who were under the impression that the Seattle Black Panther Party was a violent, racist black organization intent on overthrowing the government. Well, if that's all you know, then that's what you are told. Absolutely not the truth. The Seattle Black Panther Party was the first Rainbow Coalition. Seattle Black Panther Party started educational programming. Yes, if you came into the black community and you were a police officer intent on abusing our community, yes, they stood up and they carried arms to protect our community. So you got to come down here, see all these amazing exhibits. Again, my name is Tony B. I am the general manager of Rainier Avenue Radio. I'm happy to be the curator of this museum. Thank you to everyone who put the work into putting this together. Again, get down here, bring your children. I'm going to say that over and over and over again because it is critical and important that you do that, because this collection that I almost forgot, T. Hurd's Tacoma. If you don't know about the history of Tacoma, Tacoma had 2 black female mayors already. And the history of Tacoma is incredible and phenomenal. And so I'm happy to include for the first time what I call T. Hurd's Tacoma, because it's one gentleman who's very popular who just said, Tony, I'm going to round up a bunch of Tacoma items for you and history for you so that you can have this represented in the museum. So thanks again, T. Hurd, who wanted to be here this morning but had an emergency and couldn't make it. So I want to make sure and give him a shout out. So we're going to get started here. We have the gift shop here. Again, calltoconscience.world. You can order your tickets in advance. You can also do walk-up. And, of course, we have special rates for military, seniors, and students. as well. No more than 10 to a tour. So once you fill out, if you're filling out the form for the sign up and it's at 10, that means it's closed. And so if you're coming with the group, definitely get this done in advance. We do have walk-ups, but I'm just telling you because we experienced this last year. We don't have room because we went out of room. We won't have room. So get your ticket in advance. It's easier to get your tickets in the first 2 weeks. The last 2 weeks are kind of bananas. That's it. That's all the time that I have. That's going to do it for the kid. It's me, Tony B, on behalf of all of our guests here today. I'd like to say, whether you believe you can or whether you believe you cannot, you are probably right. I'm out.